Kia ora te whānau and welcome back to Returning to Wholeness with Catherine Parr. Before traveling to the Cook Islands, I had quietly asked the universe to align the opportunity to meet with a tohunga and to sit down and record a podcast together. There was no expectation attached to it. It was simply an ask, a gift from the universe if the opportunity presented itself. One of the reasons I had put that intention out there is because I've been fortunate enough to have many incredible spiritual teachers and leaders on this podcast, but it also felt important to me to bring forward voices that resonate with my own culture. While I'm doing my own work in this space, I also deeply respect that there are others who have been walking this path recognized within their communities for much longer than I have. And I think it's important that we create space to listen to those voices, to learn from them, and to acknowledge the work they carry. As it turned out on the flight over to Rarotonga, the man who ended up sitting next to me was Tetini Pekepo, a Cook Island Māori tohunga who spent many of his earlier years growing up in Hawke's Bay before returning home to Rarotonga to reconnect with his roots and the work he carries. What began as a simple conversation on a plane unfolded into a really beautiful and authentic kōrero about wairua, about seeing beyond the physical world, and about what it means to walk through life as matakete. Tetini shares openly about his lived experience, the guidance he follows, and the ways that work often shows up through service within the community. This conversation was so rich and layered, and I've decided to share it with you in two parts. In part one, we explore Tetini's lived experiences as matakete and how that awareness began to unfold in his life. Then in part two, the kōrero moves more deeply into the work he does within communities and the responsibility that comes with walking this path. So take a deep breath, settle in, and enjoy part one of this beautiful kōrero with Tetini Pekepo. Kia ora te, welcome to the show. How are you?
Metaki.
So that means good. Yeah.
Good
Te whai. So we were just talking about, your experiences within your spiritual space, just to give our audience just a little bit of, details around who you are. So you're tohunga back home, your class is a tohunga, and also here in Rarotonga?
Yeah.
Yeah?
Yeah, well, they've given me that title here in Rarotonga for a couple of different reasons.
And one of those would be because you do Tamoko.
Yes, and I'm also, I do kava, but they me as a master carver, but I don't. Sometimes I feel sometimes the titles are just given too loosely, especially when you come from Aotearoa and you see the extent of work they have to do before they'll being born in Aotearoa, brought up in Aotearoa. I've seen that and I witnessed it, and I understand the expertise one has to achieve, get a title such as that. And I know that the title is given to a lot of people in Aotearoa, but some of them don't accept it. But I feel that they deserve that such a title. But it's just they've been so humble, and that's the sort of person they are.
Quite common in our people, isn't it?
Yeah, in our people. I was given that title more from members of our people within the culture to do with certain arts. But again, I feel sometimes our titles are given too loosely. I dabbled with the arts back in Aotearoa from a very young age. Probably was 12, just playing around, trying to think I was the man. A lot of it was egoism, but also experimenting with an art that was quite different than what I was doing. Art has always been in me, and it runs in my family. I've got uncles over here and aunties that are quite gifted in a variety of different types of art. And over the years, I believe that some of us really don't know our full potential, and we go through life not understanding what our full potentials are. And it's quite sad because if we can only tap in to what is available to us, it's amazing what can happen, what the gifts can bring to a person. And I'm quite lucky that I tapped into mine quite early. I'm not truly understanding, but wasn't until later on I realized what I had achieved through being able to think outside the box and just giving things a go. And I also, too, realised quite early that my Chinese son is the fire monkey, and I never wanted to be known as a monkey. Honestly, to me, it was an insult. But once I learned the attributes of the monkey, I realised that, yeah, I am a monkey.
Yeah.
And now I'm quite pleased to say that I'm a monkey. Yeah.
Because so when you talk about your, because we've had quite a good korero around, your experiences in your life. And we talk about your time in Mangaya, which is where you're from.
No, I'm not from there. My father's from there.
Your father's
Yeah, I'm actually from Aotearoa.
Okay.
From a little town called Waipa. But my experiences started very, very young. But I never really knew what was happening. And it wasn't until my mid-teens that I started to... It was scary. It was scary. Some things were scaring me. Things were happening unto me that I had no control over, and I didn't know what it was. My father happened to be alive at the time. This is the early 70s, mid-70s, around mid-early 70s. It used to scare me at nights because I'd see things, feel things, and I had no control over them. Then I decided to contact him, and then he didn't sound shocked, but he told me how to deal with it. He just told me when things like that happened to me, just focused on moving my thumbs or my big toe. And things would continue to happen, and then I started to do that, and it helped. And I gave it the name of breaking because it broke whatever was happening to me. But I realised I've got quite a few Māori mates back home that were going through psychological problems. I just thought they were just crazy, but they would end up in institutes or end up having to be moved away because they didn't know how to handle them. But I truly believe that they were going through the same as I had, but I had help.
Agreed.
Yeah, I had help by my father. And I wasn't until quite a few years later, after my father had died, that my mum told me that my father says to me, I don't know what's happening to him because I'm named after my mum's father and my mum's grandfather. And I'm the second eldest son. My eldest brother, he holds my father's name and my grandfather's name, which is Lavi. And so my father thought everything would pass on to him because these things apparently happen on my father's side. But anyway, I started to see and feel things in life, and I got used to it, and I just accepted some things. To me, some things were just a coincidence. Certain things happen. When I see something and next thing you know, things start happening, or just a coincidence. But then they started happening more and more often. And I'm talking the 70s, 80s. And then I started to think about certain people that appear in my life. And I've heard a lot by other people. I'm just thinking about you. So, it happens out there. But it just happened. It started to happen more often. But I often felt as though I was blessed. If there's an angel, there was always an angel around me because there's little things. I used to roam a lot, truly roam a lot. When I say roam a lot, from very early age, when I could, my early teens, I would hitchhike everywhere. I'd get picked up by people and they'd look after me in their car, give me a feed, everything. And now some of my journeys were quite far, but I just realized there are good people around with good-natured people and willing to help you out. And I just thought, well, it's just a lot of these things coincidence. I hooked up with my first wife early in life. We were more friends for a long, long time before we actually got together, become partners, life partners. We seem to have done all right. And from a very early age, a lot of things just seemed to come my way. I started wondering what all these things were because I was seeing, feeling things, and I started searching for what is it. And I'd talk to a lot of people, and they would say it's God. I was brought up as a Catholic, but for some reason, well, it wasn't some reason, I did the research, and I couldn't really take it on. What God are we talking about? There's a lot of different beliefs and understanding. So I started looking closer into various beliefs. And I used to do judos from a very young age. Before I was 10, I stopped it, and then I got back into it in my late teens. And in judo, we were told to kneel in what they call the Caesar position on our knees and take deep breaths and quieten our mind and focus on our internal spirit. To me, it was like, this is cool, and I give it a go. But it was after a while, I started to look more into it, about meditation and what I was doing and understand what is it. And that took me on another path, find a spiritual understanding of who I am and what I've got. what is this thing? And it wasn't until about probably late teens, going on to 20 or 20 something, I realized that I had something. And I realized I started to form a sort of a spiritual understanding. Because all these things that started happening, I started just getting things. If I wanted it, it just turned up. And like I said, and I must admit, my father had passed in 96, I was 76, and things started happening. I just thought it was him. Him always being around me, because all these things would happen. Got married, I think it was 2021. We actually planned our first child so we could enjoy her in later life, our child in later life. All these things were happening, and my wife at the time, she could feel them. She knew these things were happening. They weren't a joke. She knew these. I was a bit weird because it seemed to happen around me. She accepted it after a while because it just happened a lot. But I went through life not really struggling. I don't know what it was. Little things come our way. But I must admit, I started to look for spiritual assistance. So I started to say prayer, and more than once. Whatever I try to do, I just look for guidance in whatever I'd done. But these things started to happen. As you were saying, about talking about matakite, I heard that later on in my 20s. But I always felt, and a lot of people used to say to me, "Oh, you've got this gift," But I never looked at it as a gift. I just thought I had a strong understanding of my belief, which I actually didn't. I truly believe that your belief is only as strong as your belief in the belief. And I've taken that on and I've, over the years, I'm still trying to understand that belief. I've just turned 70, and I truly believe that my belief has been evolving and keeps moving. And I think that's cool. I've accepted that. But all these things have been happening. There's some amazing things that have happened in my life that I just cannot explain. But they just, as I said, they could be coincidences. I don't know. One fine example was in early 2005, there was a tsunami that hit Phuket and devastated 100-something thousand lives were lost. Tourists and natives of Thailand on the east coast of Thailand were killed. A lot of infrastructure wrecked. But I happened to be in Gold Coast, and I was doing some Tamoko work on an individual, and he told me his kōrero. He said he was related to a Scottish sailor that married a Māori princess, and they lived on the top of the South Island, a little mutu there, a little island, and that's where they did whale watching or hunted whales. And I thought I took that on, and I designed his moko on his waiwai on his leg, and I did his tatau, and I did other work. But anyway, I left the Gold Coast. So my eldest daughter lived there at the time, and I left and I came back to Aotearoa, and I had work down Taranaki to do. So I went to New Plymouth, done some work there, and then I ended up in Opanaki. And I've got a friend that lives here that lived in Opanaki for years, but now lives in Raro. His name is Te Ramona Mare, and he's got a house there, and he had his son staying at the house. And I had to do his sons and some friends. So I went around the house, and I've got an old camper van in New Zealand that I would drive around. I've still got it. It's at my daughter's house in Palmerston North, but I drove there, and they said, just park the camper on their yard and, to stay there. And I said, no, I've got to go down the camping ground. I don't know why, but something's making me go down the camping ground. So I went down to their camping ground, and I looked we had to drive down this hill, so it was close onto the beach, down this hill. And I looked at the camping ground, and I was above it and looking down there, and I thought, I've been here. But a deja vu sort of thing, and I thought, I've been here. And then I thought, well, I'm sure this used to have carriages, railway carriages here, and they were using them for huts. And so I got on there, and there was a young couple there that were running a place, and I asked them, and they goes, yeah, he's done an old photo. And that, sure enough, it was how I was visualising was on this photo, and bloody hell. And I thought, this is weird. Anyway, I parked in there, and they showed me where to park up at the back of this camping site against this hill. And that night, something weird happened. And I visualized this house with daylight, and I was inside this house that had no windows in it, no doors. They weren't in place, but it was a concrete building with no roof on it, but it was daylight, and the sea was coming in, passing up against this house and coming into the house, and it made me rush to the back of the house, and I could see the windows where the windows were supposed to be, just big gaps, and there was a cliff at the back, and I looked up and I could see the sky, and the cliff went up, and I woke up. And I thought, what the bloody hell was that? That was weird. And anyway, the next morning I went to the house. I said, how is it? And I goes, well, I've been down there. And he goes, where? And I said, that camping ground, I don't know, but I feel like I've been there. bit of deja vu or something. And I told them what it was, and they said they couldn't remember it. And I said, no, they got old photos, and what I visualized was in that photo and more. I said, I actually visualized going into these things. And I said, but anyway, I had this weird dream. And they go, weird dream? And I said, yeah. I said, I dreamt I was in this building, I described everything, and they all looked at each other and they go, bloody hell. And they said, let's go for a ride. We jumped in their cars and we went down, opened these gates, and we went through this paddock. It was just a flat paddock. And then you could see the bit of the horizon and the thing in the distance, and this paddock was just flat with gates, and we went through these gates, and then there was these buildings for construction buildings. They were just like containers sort of thing. And I said, what are these here? And he goes, oh, they're building an artificial reef here, out here for surfing. It's an Opanaki. And I says, oh yeah. So we get there, and there are these portals, or whatever you call them, and he said, let's come with me. And we walked to the side, and it was just grass, and there's a cliff. And he says, have a look down there. And I'm looking over, and he's this building down below with the water coming on. Oh, what the fuck? And he goes, oh, what do you see? And I says, yeah, mate. I was in that room there. And they looked at each other, weird, man, weird. And anyway, they took us, and we decided to go on a bit of a tour around. And then we ended up on the street, dead end street, and we stopped, and there's a fence, and there's a paddock. And you can see the sea in the distance, and this paddock goes down over this creek. So we jumped over this proper stile. It's a stile for, jumping over the fence. So we jumped over the stile, and we go down. But there's no track, and reasonably long grass with obviously no stock in there, no sheep or anything. We go down, and there's a creek with willow trees growing over it. It's not a very wide creek, but it's got a log over it. So we make our way over this log, and here's this other paddock, and long, very long grass. And when I say long, it is about waist high. And there's a white picket fence. We get over there, and there's a unkept bloody graveyard. Yeah, and what the hell? So I'm looking at all these old names, some European Māori, the Urupa. And anyway, behind it was this hill. So we go around, and you could see these sort of, every now and again, like holes inside of this hill. So we go around, and we make our way up. These holes. And I said, what are these holes for? And he goes, actually, they are escape routes. They go to the Kumura pits up top. This is a fortified pa. It used to be a fortified pa. Really? He goes, yeah, no. So we climb up there, and we get up there, and sure enough, there's all these, you can see where the pulpits, or whatever you call them, and where the houses would be, and all this, and all these things dug in. And we're walking around and can see where the Taro Kumura pits were, and had these holes. And they says, yeah, they had holes to go in for escape. I said, escape who? He says, I wouldn't be to get attacked by the Waikato people. And I said, oh yeah, and then there's graves, Urupa up there. These are Māoris up there, belong to that Urupa. And then and then there's a sign, and on the sign it tells a story, and it talks about the Scottish captain that had his boat, his ship, and he was trading with this tribe. And this tribe was getting attacked by these Waikato tribe over on the inland side. And this captain who was trading had his boat parked out in the ocean, but he had sent over cannonballs and helped this chief out. And this tells a story on this. Yeah. And it's about how the chief gave his daughter to this Scottish captain, and he disappeared, and he took his daughter with her. Oh. Basically, that was it. And then I said to the boys, I know where he went. And I said, yeah, it's above thing. I said, I just done some Tamoko on this young fella over in Gold Coast. What? I said, yeah, he told me the corridor is a young princess from Taranaki. And I go, bullshit. And I go, no, straight up, man. I done this chat. And he goes, wait, last year or something? I said, no, just a couple of weeks ago. And I go, bloody weird. But anyway, there was a lot of things were happening during that week I was there. Another time, as I said, I was asleep in I was actually had my laptop out, and I've got this file that I call feelings. And every time weird things would happen, I'd put it on, tell the story about all these weird things that were happening to me. Anyway, I was putting something in, then I heard this loud, high-pitched whistle. What the hell? And because of all these things happening to me all the time, I try to decipher them, break them down to give me some sense of comfort.
Yeah, rationale.
I heard this whistle, so I walked outside of my camper, and it was dark. And it was pitch black out behind my thing because I was backed up against this hill. It was all bush, native bush. And I listened to it, and I said, that's a bloody kiwi. That's a kiwi. And I said, yeah, that's what it is. It's a kiwi. And I thought, these kiwis in there. So I walked back into my camper. And on my laptop were 3 kiwi feathers.
Oh, that's beautiful.
And I thought, what the hell? And anyway, I got them and I put them in an envelope. And the next morning, I asked the boys, and they go, yeah, there's kiwis down there, and I'd sleep. And he says, but I didn't know they were still there. They said, we didn't know they were still there. I said, well, I heard them last night. They came visiting. And they go, yeah. And I said, yeah, they came into my thing. And I said, while I was outside here, they shaped these feathers. And they go, bloody hell. But I'd been visited. I've been collecting kiwi feathers for quite a few years. They seemed to pop up. When my son, who passed away when he was only 9 months, I never wrapped them up in a cup and I put him in a coffin. I wrapped him up in a tuffa cloth and I buried him the old way. And he was buried on top of my father. But his hapu, they were from Pakipaki and the Hastings. When he was in the marae, all these crazy things were happening. They knew something was happening, was a tohu, and then they realised something was up. And anyway, he had this old Kiwi cloak on during the whole time. It was 3 days because they didn't want him to. They wanted him to go to a certain urupa of theirs. And I didn't want him to go there because I know about the urupa and their people gave part of that urupa, sold it to these Europeans, and they carved that hill away and they sold the lime. And now there's a lime thing there, and that now you can see the sacred maunga, which was the and that's where the urupa was. And they've dug right up to the urupa. And I says, you want to put my son up there and one day you're going to fall down? And I says, nah. And then I told him my kōrero. But anyway, there's another mate that was coming through, another tangi that was coming through, and they were taken to Waikato. And one of the rangatiras of that thing, Pehi Kara, and he knew my father well. When he got up there, he gave the right for me to bury him on top of my father. So all the elders turned around and looked at me, and they was giving the okay. And so, but anyway, when we went, a lot of things happened during that hikoi to my father's menama grave. A lot of strange things happened, and they knew it was a tohu. All these tied my son up with flax from that area. I collected the harakeke to make some tauta so I could tie my son up. And then this woman saw me, and then she gave me some already produced, and she wanted what to do with it. Because no, they don't use it today. And so I used it and I told her. So the one I already collected, because it was collected for the purpose, I also wrapped that up with my boy and buried it with him. But a whole lot of weird things happened during the time. And their tohu was 2 rainbows. And sure enough, I was carrying them out of the wharenui to the hearse, which was my brother's 1955 Ford F100 hearse. Put them in, I was carrying them there. And it was raining, but only on me.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it was only on me. And as I was carrying them, and then there was 2 rainbows. And then they all said that's his rainbow. But anyway, we took him to we stopped at a couple of marae's just to pay the respect because he was linked to them. And then when I did finally put him on my father, I dug my father up and I said a bit of a karakia, and they all did their pe'e and chants. And then I saw them grab the cloak, and that's when they usually take it off. But they didn't. They had a meeting and they turned it backwards and let it go down with them. I says, what's that for? And they says, he's going with him. I said, going with him? And they go, yeah, no. And I knew it was an old one. And I said, why'd you turn it backwards for? And he says, so it doesn't return. But that didn't work because I keep on getting these huru kiwi, the kiwi feathers turning up, keep turning up. And every now and again, something will turn up and I get these feathers and I always give them to my ex-wife. I put them in an envelope and she goes, everything all right? Yeah, everything's all right. Everything's good. But anyway, back in Taranaki, yeah,
That was a beautiful kōrero.
back in Taranaki, I was about to leave and I was one more night and I told the proprietor of that camping ground that I'm about to leave early in the morning. And they said they would leave the gate open for me. And I said, thank you. But anyway, I was having a boy, and next thing you know, I could see this white ball of like smoke or something rolling towards me, like a wave. And I thought, what the hell? And I tried to go back to sleep, and I thought, nah, there's a lot of weird things being happening. 2004, Christmas Eve or New Year's Eve, there was the big tsunami. And here I was on the seafront. And I thought, no, I'm out of here. I just thought, no, I'm out of here. And I thought, no. And I just had a lot of anxiety. I'm like, no, I'm getting out of here. So I actually drove out of there early in the morning. Would have been about maybe 1, 2 o'clock, maybe even earlier. And I drove up into the town, Whanaki, and I started heading south. And I saw a sign, so many miles to part there. And I thought, no, that's still on the coast. I've got to go inland. So I found a road and I headed inland. And I kept on going anywhere, and I kept on going, ended up in farmers' bloody backyards. This is early in the morning, so I turned around and come back and find a route. And then I kept on driving. And then I got out, and it started to get really foggy. And I saw a light, and it was quite dim because of the thick cloud that had come down low. So I jumped out to have a piss, get out, and I'm standing on the middle of the road. Then I see a sign pointing to this little town. Can't remember the name of it. It's only a small town. And I thought, oh, yeah, I know that town. So I jumped onto that road and I headed in. And as I got closer, the fog was that thick you could hardly see. And I realised I was in the town, and there were the shops either side of me. And I drove along, and then I came to an intersection. And I realised it was that thick you could hardly see. And I thought, wow, there's an intersection there. And the street lights, they'd sort of dim in this low cloudful thing that had come down. And I heard something coming down the road. So I looked up to my right, and here's this bloody, looked like a Christmas tree coming out of this fog. It was a big truck. It came out, and it looked pretty cool. It drove down, and then it had its blinkers on to turn left. And all I could hear was the brakes that had pulled in. And I drove down. There was a 24-hour service station open. So I go in there. Must have been about 6 o'clock in the morning by that time. And I give me a pie and a cup of coffee. Then I says to the gentleman behind the counter, hey, bro, how to get up to the Mount Taranaki? So I head down the road about 1 kilometre. There's a sign on your left, and it says Mount Egmont something. And he said, just follow that, and it goes all the way up. Cheers. So I get down there, and I saw the sign, so I followed it, and there's a tar-sealed road that goes right up and winds all the way to this big car park. And boy, when I got up there, it was daylight.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And I thought, wow, because I came out of the clouds, and this time I was right above, and the maunga next to me, Taranaki. And I thought, wow. So I get up there, and then these people turn up, and they're going for a hike. I yelled out, yeah, bon, pungi. And then they'd never really acknowledged me. They just carried on and did their hike. Anyway, I made another coffee in my camp, and I went out onto the car park, and as far as I could see was just all white. It was the clouds, and that's what I drove through. So it was really low. And I could see, as far as I could see, was just a big blanket of white. And in the distance, you could see some maungas like that. And then I looked towards the sea, and here, above all this, was a rolling cloud coming towards me. Oh, shit. It looked like a wave, and that's what I had visioned.
Your vision.
Yeah, and I thought, well, man, pretty spooky. So I got my phone, and I rang up here to my wife, and I says, and she knew I was in Opanaki, and I says to her, have a guess where I am? She says, you're on top of the maunga, Taranaki. I said, how do you know? Yes, that's you.
Yeah.
Then I had a quick talk with her, and I took off, and then eventually I made it to Palmerston North, gave those feathers to my ex-wife. And she said, you all right? I said, yeah, I'm okay. There's a lot of weird things there. And that's, there was pretty crazy experience, but that's only one of many of the things that have happened in my life, but they're all good. And I really feel sometimes angels, well, what is an angel? Is there someone always there? Because a lot of things. On last Wednesday, just recently, my birthday was coming up, and my wife asked me if she wanted to go out, and I said, I don't celebrate. And she goes, I know, it's just thought you might want to go out for tea or something. I no. And I was just thinking if some of my mates I hadn't got together with over here, and we're all about the same age. And I took off into Vonniers over here. It's an establishment going over here. It's owned by my mate, Heather, and his dear wife, Yvonne. And I was in Vonniers, and I thought, man, I haven't seen my mate Nia for a while. Geez, we got to get on the piss. We're going. And I thought, I haven't seen him for a while. Then I get home here, and I'll just sit over here having a beer. Then I get a call, and it's my mate Tok, who's a musician over here, and he goes, bro, we're having a few drinks tonight. Nia told me to give you a ring. He says, having a few drinks, so Robert's here. And Robert owns a business over here as well. He's meeting over at 6 o'clock. I said, yes, man, thank you for that. I need this. And anyway, I get there, and what a night. It was a brilliant night. And I told Nia, I says, man, I was bloody in your shop. And I said, man, I haven't seen on there for a while. We need to get together, have a bit of a laugh. And yeah, and that's what it was. He says, well, your prayers have come true again. Your wishes have come true again. Because I've said it before. One time he just rung up without me even hanging. He rung up, bro, we're having to get together. Yeah, but yeah, it's just a whole lot of, but I just look at them as maybe just following the right paths and understanding that sometimes we may have lived before. But I don't know. I just feel like that someone's always there. And I know my father, even now and again, certain things happen with me and my father, and he's long gone. But we still feel each other. He's been over 50 years now, but I still feel him. And my brothers are the same too. And I've got brothers in Australia that they said that my father was a fencer, and he did a variety of different types of work. And my younger brother, he's also a fencer, and he works on a farm in Australia. And I says, you enjoy it out there, bro? He goes, yeah, bro, I'm always feeling dead. Yeah, bro. I said, yeah, I always wanted to be a fencer. And he goes, yeah, I know you did. You always told me that you wanted to go out fencing. I said, yeah, because you're out there alone, all by yourself and with nature. And he goes, yeah, that's why I like it, bro. That's why I enjoy that outdoors. But you're doing something that he used to do anyway. And I said, yeah, bro, because my father was also a sailor and he loved sailing. And that's how he got to Aotearoa, New Zealand. He sailed on a yacht, America's yacht. Yeah.
In Mangaia?
No, he apparently when I was in Mangaia, I never knew he was a sailor, but we were brought up on the ocean, but on just small boats, fishing boats. My father had a commercial license for diving and crayfish, sell all our crayfish in Napier to a place called Saline Fisheries, and we used to sell eels there as well. But he had a license for diving for power. We used to sell them a place in Palmerston North, that's only recently closed. When I say recently, about 4 or 5 years ago, and this was in the 60s, we would drive like a bat out of hell with all our power on board, a truckload of power, but they had to be alive. And so they would go through them. Any dead ones would be given back to us. They wouldn't take them dead. They had to be alive. And then they were canned, and the black colour was taken out of them. And so they looked sort of yellow. This was back in the late 60s and into the early 70s. And I used to tell everyone we used to sell them by the ton, but our poor little truck could nowhere take a ton. Could nowhere take a ton. And I said we'd go like a bat out of hell because we were going for, it was probably only 50 Ks. Yeah. And that's a long way to go. Back then, I felt nice flat out. And that's when I used to get treated because I would sort the power out that were given back to us in the little packets of 6 and wrap them up in newspaper. And on the way home, Dad would stop at the pubs with a little notebook and go and raffle them off inside the pub. And that's when I used to get my treats of a pie, a chippies, and a Fanta or a Coke. And we'd stop in Woodville first and then go to Dannyvirk, and then from Dannyvirk to Takapu. Woodstock pub sometime, depending on him, how much he's had to drink. Or we'd just get home. And if we had any left, we usually gave them to the shearers. We'd, if they were still good, we'd give them put them in farmers' letterboxes. Because he knew a lot of the farmers from his work in fencing like that. But yeah, it's been amazing and mysterious in sort of life of mine. My wife in this relationship here, she's always known something different about me, but I've accepted it. But I've never taken on that mantle as a matakita because I don't necessarily always see things. Sometimes I can't bring it on. It just happens. But just recently, a lot of things have happened. And, just a lot. And it just seems to be one after another. I've just accepted, and that's just life. But even my mum's 90th, even her 50th. Yeah, her 50th. Yeah, my father-in-law at the time, we were going diving. We're divers. And so I forgot to take my weight belt. And we were going to a part that me and my dad, we would go as when I was young. And I'd have a wheelbarrow with his diving gear in it, and he'd be carrying things, and we'll walk on the side of a hill. This is a place called Blackhead Station, and we'll walk out towards what we call the wreck near Parongaho, and we'd walk at high tide, and we'd walk along the sheep tracks back as a child, and then we'd go dive at high tide. It was better to dive at high tide because the kelp was up, and you could dive around them, and then come out at low tide and walk back on the papa, on the rocks to get back to our vehicle. But anyway, my father had died, and my mum was 50th birthday. And there's 3 of us going out. My eldest brother, a dear friend of his, Ho Carmel, his name was, and my father-in-law at the time, Jim Weston. And we had got all our gears ready, and my brother had made these proper packs. They could carry everything back in. And we were just going for crayfish, and that's all we were. And we were going for 50 crayfish because my mum's 50th anniversary.
Only 50.
Yeah, so and then I realised I forgot my weights. And my brother goes, well, you'll be holding the bloody tube. And I thought, bloody hell.
So
No, it wasn't. That's not an insult at all. And so they were the main two divers anyway. And I presumed that I would be bloody holding the tube. But I hadn't been out there since I was a child. Father was alive. I hadn't been out there, but I knew where we were. As we were walking out there along the side of the hill, I said to my father-in-law, well, no, we weren't on the side, but it was high tide. And I said to my father-in-law, out here there are rocks, and they're only so long, but they've got a hole right through them. And I says, later on explained to him how they may have been created. And I says, I'll collect them. He said, what are you going to use? And I says, oh, there's a lot of stuff on the beach that had been washed up. There's be ropes and everything. So sure enough, I found these rocks, and I made myself a weight belt, tied it around myself. And my brother and his mate took off, and I just got the tires and all that. And I started to swim out after them. And then something made me go to this old spot. And I could still see from when I was a young boy, clearly that the spot was, the sea still looked the same from way back then. And I went to this place and I could see the feelers of, not the feelers or whatever, because of this crayfish. The feelers.
Yeah.
Were poking out, and I knew there were crayfish under this ledge. And it wasn't that deep. It was probably as deep as this here. It's only about 8, 9 feet or 10 feet deep. Maybe a bit deeper. But I dived down and went under the ledge. Sure enough, all these crayfish all lined up upside down everywhere. And I looked down and I could see the big male there. I came up, took a breath, and I looked over. My brother he was way further, probably about 20 odd feet away, 20 odd meters away. And I saw my father-in-law on the shore, and he was looking at us. And then I dived down and reached underneath, grabbed the bloody biggest one, and then grabbed another one, that kicked it. I got up, and my suit was quite thick. And I just held the big one and let it grab my chest. So sure enough, it grabbed my chest. So I was like, that's not, oh, good. And now it's good. It wasn't digging into me. It was just digging into my seat. And I came up, and I looked at my brother, hey! And he turned around. So they came over, and I put one in the bag, and they came over, and then they helped me get this big one off my chest. And later on, they called me a bloody rookie for that to happen. But I said, no, I couldn't handle it because it was just broken. So I'm just let it grab my chest. They wouldn't believe me. But anyway, we went, and then we had a good day, and we got our 50. It didn't take long. And we didn't clean the whole ride out because there was some smaller ones. We only took what we needed. And we got on shore, and my father-in-law goes, wow, I saw that. And I said, yeah. And he goes, yeah. And they said, didn't take as long. I says, no. I says, but I remember this as a child coming out here. And I says, and my older brother, he wasn't here. He was in the islands. I used to come out here with my father. I told Jim, my father-in-law, about as a child, how I was brought up then, how it would get really cold. And Dad would strip off naked, and he'd be walking along the beach, carrying a bag of power on his shoulder. I'll be pushing a wheelbarrow, and I'll be wrapped up in his clothes that he's taken off. And his dick must be blowing while he's walking. He didn't care because there was no one around. And I always remember that, as long as the sun was warm. And he would just get back, and then we would load up. And we would walk a long way. We would walk a long way back to our vehicle. I'd be pushing a wheelbarrow with everything on it. Like this. I'd be looking at that. Tangoro. Tangoro titi, tangoro tatata. Those memories. And I told my brothers later on, they go, no, he used to do that when we were out fencing, because we would forget to take something warm with us, and we would get wet, and then he would wrap us up, and he'd carry on working. That's how he died, because his lungs collapsed on, because he was always getting a flu, pneumonia. And after a while, his lungs couldn't handle it. And he died quite early at 46 or 45, something like that. Yeah. But, I received all his bloody gifts, kutu or whatever.
Of course not. You shadowed him, eh? So you shadowed your dad. So you followed your dad around. You were the one that.
Yeah, well, I was from a very early age, before I was 10. They knew something was wrong. I couldn't understand certain things. They didn't know what dyslexia was. So basically, I was the one in my family chosen, because my older brother was in Mangaia, my eldest sister, she was going to college, and another sister, she's like me. She's dyslexic as well. But I was the one chosen in the family. Go get this boy, hold this boy. And but what a life. I had good fun. We'd go scrub cutting up these steep hills. And my job was because he had these big McCulloch like weed eaters, but with the big blades on it. And he would cut his way up the bush. Then I had to get the files, the petrol, and anything else, the water, and I would meet him up further, put them up, always in front of him. And so he didn't have to go looking for the stuff. And then now and again, he taught me how to cook. Sometimes I would light a fire, making sure that it didn't catch on to anything, and cook up a brew where we had these billies so big with you light the fire in the middle of this billy, and it heated the water around the outside, and it'd cook up our tea. Yeah, any other kai we had, corned beef, onions and tomatoes, but mainly, my mum would make us kai and we'll take it with us, and I'd have to prep the kai. And sometimes you had workers, and if we were staying deep in the bush, we would camp there. And way up near Wairoa, Nuhaka, we were deep in the bush, and he was about 3 or 4 workers with him, New Zealand Māori boys, and I would do the cooking, but Dad would get up early and we'd prep our breakfast. Usually was just, and I still have powdered milk. Usually would either porridge, powdered milk, bit of butter on it, and a bit of toast if we could make a toast. But we didn't have a toast, everything was on fire. But we knew how to make a toast if you really wanted it. Or we had make these camp breads, what we call the mai, which is like a big scone mix. And so we'd have that for breakfast or something like that. And Dad and them would get it all ready, and then my job was sort of prep everything for our kai to take with us, our water, all these things. It was good fun, and I learned a lot, chasing wild pigs, wild turkeys,
Yes.
deer and all that.
Were you, I hear those wild pig hunting days were pretty brutal back in the day.
Yeah, they were. With us, it wasn't too bad. We only got what we really needed. We didn't really go hard. I was over here in the Cook Islands, in Māngea. I did a lot of pig hunting, mainly because me and a cousin, who's now just buried down the road here, we were the main, one of the main providers for, along with my uncle, obviously. But then when I turned up, my uncle didn't have to come as much, and I enjoyed it. I enjoyed going fishing every day in the taro patch, digging. And then quite a few strange things happened with me there, and that's when my uncle realised I had that gift, that I had inherited it, because he's got it. And he would often talk to me about certain things, but he would never mention about it, but he would just talk to me in a roundabout way about certain things. And he did actually get me to see an elder, and that elder was Abraham Pukino, to try to interpret some of the things that had happened to me, because I didn't know. But I would go to him and we would discuss certain things, but never really said much. He just knew some of us. All he could say was, my uncle bloody had big balls. Anyway, he was always like me. He just wore shorts around, and he had big bloody nuts around. But they were born in what they call Aoariki, is the palace where the high chief is. They were born there in the grounds there. And all I remember that made sense to me was those who are brought up and who were born in that area in the Aoariki have got big balls. And I just thought, oh yeah, but what he meant is got mana. Okay, got mana. And that's basically what it meant. But we had to do the cleaning up on this. Every 3 months over here, we have what we call tūtaka. Tūtaka, there's a health department that come around and making sure everything is clean, getting rid of coconut shells with water in. They could gather water, cans and because of the mosquitoes. And so we've got to go around and clean up. And the health department come in and inspect your section to make sure it's right. Then tick it off or tell you what we have to do. So they have that in all the out islands. But in the out islands, they even go inside your house to make sure everything's clean, because we can't afford people getting sick for any reason. And so our job was to clean the Aoariki, the palace grounds. And when I left Aotearoa, my eldest brother said to me, bro, there's a Bible there, and it's got our akapapa in it. It's an old Bible. If you see it, I want it. So, and anyway, we're doing the cleaning up. And then at the back of the palace, there's a sort of what they call the makatea. It's a rise coal that has come out of the ground. It's just straight up. This was behind. And in Māngea, you've got coral that comes along where the main townships are. There you've got Tamurua, which is on the east, and Iwirua, which is on the northwest. And we're on the west. Oniroa's on the west. Got this upraised coral right beside the palace. Now, up on this thing, I could see a shelf of some sort. So I climbed up it, and I could see some footholds and things that were deliberately put in. And I climbed up it, and it's quite a big shelf, about a big area, about a wee bit about as long as this here, but a wee bit deeper. It's a shelf, and then it goes up to the makatea there, and it sort of curves over. It's like a bit of a shelter. And anyway, I was looking around, and there's a lot of these holes into the coral, braised coral. I saw something in one of them, and I reached in and I grabbed it, and I pulled it out. And it was a cloth wrapped around something, so I unrolled it. And I realized it was a book, and and the book was folded up, and then I pulled the book apart, and it was a Bible, and I looked at the back, and it had our akapapa, and I recognized some of the names.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I got it, and I rolled it back up and stuck it back in. And then I went down. I said to my uncle, my brother wanted this book. It's a Bible. It's up there. And he goes, hey? He goes, yeah, it's up there. And he goes, why didn't you grab it? And I goes, he can come and get it himself. I left it there because I didn't want to be speak. But anyway, he just showed me some things at the palace grounds and where he was born. And there's what they call a concrete foundation where a house used to be, but it's nothing there now. And apparently that's where they were all born, my uncle and my brother. But outside the house, there's like a step. And it's a big flat rock. And he lifted that rock up and had a look underneath, and he put it back down. And he says, when a child was born, the afterbirth was put underneath this rock. And I looked at him and I goes, angai te tupa, because I saw crabs. In other words, to feed the crabs. Angai te tupa. And he just put it back down. Anyways, there were certain things that happened. I won't go into detail, but the palace was under construction. Our ariki wasn't staying in there, but the ariki died, and then the palace was finished, and was finished, and the new ariki was elected, and everything was cleaned up in the old ariki, the grounds, and the patu that where Dad and them were born, that was broken down and moved, but they couldn't move that rock, and now it's just known as the tukatapu. Yeah, they call it the tukatapu, and apparently it's still there.
What does that mean in English?
Sacred rock. They can't move it. They couldn't. They tried to move it, but they couldn't.
You tried moving it?
No, I haven't. But I know that my cousin went over there, and they didn't know who he was, and he was brought up there. He left there when he was 14. He came back when he was in his late 50s, and went over, and he saw that rock, and he picked it up, and people saw him. They goes, who's that? Because you're not anyone's allowed to go in the grounds because it's sacred grounds because it belongs to the High Chief, Aori. But he walked in, and he was looking around. Then he picked up that rock and looked underneath, and he put it back down, and he got a bit of a shock. But apparently only our family is allowed to move that.
It's like the sword and the stone.
Yeah. But yeah, there's a lot of. I think I mentioned about when I was diving in an area that I hadn't really dived for a long time. I got attacked by a taniwha, tiger shark, and then I came out of the water, and I to get back to where I was living on top of the makatea, which was in the makatea Veitata, I would have to walk a long way around to go up the cutting that was put up by the army early 1960s, and that's to get back to the house. But I walked onto the road, and then something made me go to the back of this house. Then I could see a track that was overgrown, but I could definitely see a track. And I followed this track, and just like that, I was the back of our house. My uncle asked me one time, and I said, I don't know, but he accepted that. He just knew that's just how we work. Yeah, pretty crazy.
Do you think it's crazy, or do you think we've been conditioned to think that way?
Well, I just say crazy, but I've accepted it. Wherever it happens, there's something working in mysterious ways that I cannot explain. But I do believe in karakia, do believe in prayer. And I find that whatever is happening out there, I've just accepted it. And I feel I've been watched over and looked after in a lot of ways. There's a lot of things that have happened to me in my life. Like I bought my house in Waipawa. I felt the calling to go back to my hometown. I was living in Palmerston North. I felt the calling, and I applied for a state house. And I had two children, my wife, and applied for a state house, but preferably one for sale. That was 1980. I got a house and one for sale, and it was only $2,000 deposit. The house was only $22,000 with the big quarter-acre section. I had the money for the deposit, and it was only $22 a week. Yeah, I didn't have a job for maybe 1 or 2 weeks, and I refused to eat as long as my children were ate, and they were happy. But I could live off I used to live in our river, brought up in our river, and get eels. The kids used to eat rabbits and think they was chicken. Mm. They were brought eating lamb's tails, and the way I was brought up. Kaimwana and tuna wai. So I could, not a problem, but I just needed the money. I had a mortgage, so-called mortgage. I didn't actually go get a loan. And then I got a job building. I didn't know how to build. I wasn't a builder, but I was pretty good with my hands. I knew how to make things, put things together. I knew how to weld. I knew how to put things together with steel. And so I got a job, and I was told that they recognised me as from that area originally. They said, get your brother to work with you and we'll give you a job. So I did. And he came and worked with me for a while. The company learned that I had skills and that I pick up things quite easily, and quite quickly I went up the ranks. I'd done all right and started doing things on my house, opening it up, extending, putting a big workshop and garage. And in a very short time, I'd done quite a lot. And then I had another calling, and that calling was because of our youth. I used to walk everywhere. One of the reasons I used to walk and cycle was it gave me time to think, ponder over various issues that I may have and how to deal with them. So in my walks, I was able to ponder over these issues and think, how can I deal with this and how can I do it? I found out a lot of my problems came from me, not thinking things over properly. And because it was me, it was easier to fix. And I was able to get in and straighten things out and humble myself and just carry on. And because of that attitude, I just started to do all right. Within about 3 years after first moving there in 1980, I was building houses. I'd built a couple. I was working with various people. But at the same time, I started to notice the problems with our youth there. And they were getting up to mischief. They were doing I would never have done when I was a youth. And I used to wander around and stay down my river, stay at people's place, get into a lot of mischief, have fun. But these kids were getting into things that we wouldn't do. And so I decided to round them up. By that time, I had my own house with a garage, the big garage with a pool table and stuff. And I started, I'd catch them drinking. You don't tell them to stop drinking. They're just going to carry on. You didn't tell them to do certain things. They were smoking. I didn't do that. But I said, if you want somewhere to hang out, come around home. So I'd let them, whatever drinks they had. I didn't ask them where they got it from. They probably ripped it off from someone. I never asked. I just let them come in, somewhere to hang out. I had couches in my garage and everything. And I started getting a little following, and then they would watch me when I started doing my own work around the home. Then they would ask if they can help me out. I said, yeah, you can help, but you can't do this, you can't do that. No drinking, no smoking, da-da-da. Slowly they started to follow me around doing things, and I had them start to do things, get to know their own skills. Yeah, and then slowly after a while I started being like their father. I realised a lot of these kids, I knew their fathers. Some of their fathers were gang members. Some of them were just local shearers. Listen, kids just weren't going to school, couldn't be bothered. Kids' parents didn't know. They'd wander back at night as if they had been to school. They're just getting into mischief. So I started just doing things with them, looking after them, showing them other ways to do things, just showing them some of the things that I'd got up to. I played a lot of sports, and I was still playing these sports, but I gave up the sports to focus more on these kids. And I formed 2 touch teams and a netball team with these tamariki. And I found the best way to do it was burn them up. And they couldn't get into mischief at night. Then I joined a kapahaka group, got some of them joined with me. Eki Kiri Otarangi, that was the name of the group, from Pekepo. It was a sister club to Peter Sharple's group, Huni Waititi, up in Auckland. And because Eki Kiri Otarangi was the hapu of Peter Sharples, because Peter Sharples was there from there. So we started this club, and I got into kapahaka and maurako with the taiaha, and made 2 taiahas and gave one to my young sidekick. I kept one. Yeah, and I brought it over here with the taiaha over here. I still got it out there in my studio. But yeah, that's when things started happening. I started getting into certain things in the government, and my local council could see what I was doing. One day they had a council meeting, and I was invited to the council meeting. I didn't know what I was there for. I turned up, bandana on, I think it was a black one, leather jacket, and a couple of these young people, so they can see what sort of activities I get up to. So I sat in at this meeting, and it was going on and on about the various, the agenda had to do with our little town. But I didn't need to listen to all this. I couldn't contribute, really. And then I was about to go, and I stood up to go out, and then someone said, no, tea. And I said, what am I here for? And anyway, they skipped everything. It went straight to me, and then they started talking about certain problems in the town and what they're seeing on my street and in my place. They're going on. I just listened to them, and I know, yeah, so I'm in trouble. And I didn't care. And I just listened to them go. But before I could say anything, a policeman stood up. Then he said, ever since the children have been under T's control, we know where all the children are. There's been less activity in the streets at night. There's been no petty crimes and vandalism. So we find it's a good thing that all we got to do is try to how to work with T. And then one of the shopkeepers said, well, every time the kids used to come into my shop, I used to have to watch them and wander around the shop following them. And he says, I know things used to go missing, but I couldn't catch them. But now they've got other activities, and we can see what sort of thing T's got them doing. Down at the abandoned school, they're either playing indoor basketball on the netball court, or they're playing tag with balls and throwing it at each other, or they're playing touch. Or the baseball, or he's taking them out the beach and he's got them diving and doing things out the beach. Everyone sees that, everyone talks about it. And so it was, how can we help you? And then our local council just said to me that they've got a surplus vehicle, it was a pickup truck, and if I'd like it. And I says, for what? And he says, we see you use your wagon to cart all these kids around. And at the time I had a big 1959 Ford Country Squire, big American yank tank. And I could fit 13 of those kids in the back of that thing. And we would go do things. And I said to them, well, mate, they'll get wet and cold on there. I says, anyway, thank you very much. And I says, so is that it? So I walked out. Anyway, about a week later, a red van turned up. It bloody had to be red too. I don't know why. Turned up on my yard. I asked the wife, where did that come from? They says, it's yours. I said, from whose? The council. They says, anything goes wrong, just take it up to their yard. So I taught the kids some waiata. So I loaded them all in the van. We went up to the council and asked for a meeting with whoever. Right there in their foyer, I thanked everyone for what they've given, and I was going to do my best to use that van in the appropriate way. Then I got this tamariki to do a waiata. Yeah, and then things started happening. Doors started opening. It was good. It was really good. I just had to teach the tamariki different virtues concerning my hometown. But the local gang had really taken control.
Thank you for joining me for part 1 of this kōrero with Tetini Pekepo. There's something really powerful about simply listening to someone speak from their lived experiences, especially when those experiences sit within the spaces of wairua, intuition, and matakete. In part 2, we continue this conversation and explore more deeply the work Tetini does within communities, the guidance he follows, and the responsibility that comes with walking this path. So if this kōrero resonated with you, make sure you join me for part 2, where we continue unpacking this beautiful conversation. Until then, thank you for being here, and thank you for listening with an open heart. Muri ora.